long journey, a hard pillow, a guilty conscience, a heavy heart. These are the things that make men dream. It had been 2 days since he had left home. Esau was back home seething in the background. Rebekah was weeping. Isaac was waving goodbye. 2 days on a journey, 500 miles. Jacob is on his way from Beersheba to a place called Haran, in a land called Paddan Aram. And to get there, you had to travel north, and then you had to go across east across the Jordan River, and then north again towards Damascus, and then east again to Tadmor, and then a sharp turn north until you made that final leg of the journey, crossing the Euphrates River and finally arriving in Haran, which was located not very far from the southern border of present-day Turkey. That was a journey backwards in time for Jacob. Backwards because he was retracing the steps that his grandfather Abraham had taken when he came from Haran to the promised land many years ago. But Abraham left behind him a settlement of people, a clan that grew and prospered over the years. So it was natural that Rebekah would think of Haran when she cast about for a safe haven for her wayward young son. Now, it was far enough east that Esau hopefully wouldn't follow him there, yet there was family there, so Jacob wouldn't be alone. All in all, Haran was a sensible location, and Rebekah's plan was simple, right? By sending Jacob to Haran, she was putting him in a safe place for a few months until Esau's anger passed away. And then she would send word for Jacob to come home. In the meantime, she hoped that her son would marry one of his relatives there and eventually return with bride in hand. To her, this was a good plan. And in fact, it did come to pass, but not exactly how Rebekah had envisioned. Now, all that time was in the future when Jacob set out on his lonely journey to Haran. He's been on the road now for a couple days, 2 days walk, 2 days to think, 2 days to ponder, 2 days to wonder what might have been. He left home so quickly, it wasn't the beautiful send-off, of course, that he would have wanted. No, he hurried out of town lest Esau would decide to take matters into his own hands. Jacob was running for his life. Relationships broken, family ties destroyed. Now, on the evening of the second day, as the sun sinks over the western horizon, Jacob stops for the night, and he comes to the outskirts of a little city called Luz, a place unknown to him, a city filled with strange and possibly dangerous people. So filled with fear was Jacob that when he came to Luz, he dared not enter the city, even though night had already fallen. And outside the town, on a little hillside strewn with rocks and boulders, Jacob made his bed. In that part of the world, night comes quickly. In the gathering of the darkness, Jacob rests his head upon a large flat stone. And I imagine he had a hard time sleeping that night as he reminisced in his mind. I wonder if he thought about, his family. Did he worry about his aging father? Did a silent tear slip down his cheek as he remembered waving goodbye to his mother? Did his face turn crimson in the darkness as he replayed the shameful deceit? Did a bullet of fear strike his heart as he thought about Esau's pledge to kill him? I'm sure he thought about all those things and much more as he tried to sleep on a rocky bed under the stars with a stone for a pillow. And as the stars came out and the strange sounds of the night filled his ears, Jacob realized for the very first time he was truly alone. He was homeless. He was penniless. He was helpless. He was all alone. Did he not say to himself that night, "How did this happen to me?" Jacob, son of Isaac, grandson of Abraham, bearer of the promise of God, now running for his life. How did all this happen? He had only one person to blame, himself, right? That much is sure. And I'm sure he didn't argue that point at all, for he was the one who cheated his brother, right? He was the one who lied to his father. He was the deceiver. He was the scoundrel. He was the one who broke up his own family. Jacob, you fool, no wonder you sleep uneasily tonight. No wonder you dream these strange dreams. Your heart is heavy because your conscience is guilty. Your hands aren't clean. No wonder you can't sleep tonight. Jacob got what he wanted. That night, alone on the hillside outside the city of Luz, resting his head on a stone pillow, he could only reflect on the terrible price he paid for the thing that he wanted so much. And I pause to mention a point of some interest. Okay, they tell us that if you visit this area today, okay, it doesn't look much different than it did in Jacob's day. Barren, strewn with rocks. It looks like a bleak moonscape. It wasn't at all the most likely place where a man would go to have a meeting and an encounter with God. In fact, it's the kind of place you might go if you're running from God. At length, he drifted off into an uneasy sleep, and while he slept, he had one of the most famous dreams in history. Genesis chapter 28. Verses 12 and 13 tells us what he saw. It says, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And there above it stood the Lord. God had never spoken to Jacob before. For all the years of his life, God had never spoken directly to Jacob. Okay? To his grandfather Abraham, yes. To his father Isaac, yes. But to Jacob, no. For his whole life, he lived on borrowed faith, the borrowed faith of his father and his grandfather. He was raised in the faith. He was taught their faith. He knew their faith. He even believed their faith. But he had never had a personal experience with God, the God of his father and his grandfather. And so to Jacob, this was all secondhand reality. And the amazing point is that God now speaks to Jacob at a moment of his desperation. All this happened, or all that has happened, okay, so far is prologue. Even his deception, his trickery was used by God to bring him to this very precise moment in life. And now that he's running for his life, now that he's leaving the promised land, now that he has disgraced himself, and now that he has finally reached rock bottom, at that exact moment, that's when God speaks to Jacob. C.S. Lewis said that God whispers to us in our pleasure, but he shouts to us in our pain. Pain, he said, is God's megaphone to rouse a sleeping world. Now, God moves to rouse Jacob, even while he sleeps. And it happens in the form of a strange dream. And then in his dream, Jacob saw a stairway. In the Hebrew, the word is salam. It means ladder. But more typically, it means a stairway or a stair step, okay? Descending down from heaven to earth. And the key point is that Jacob sees this stairway resting on the earth right where he happened to be. It was right there. And on that stairway, Jacob saw the angels of God going up and down the stairs. And it's worth noting that not many people in the Bible ever saw angels. Most people live their entire lives never once seeing an angel, okay? But here and there, we do have certain critical moments in history where God allows a very few select people to see his angels at work. It's as if God would sort of draw back the curtains at a crucial moment to let someone see the angels of God at work behind the scenes. And Jacob is one of those lucky few. Now, what are the angels doing? Well, they're taking messages from earth up to heaven, and then messages from heaven down to earth. They're heavenly couriers who report to God concerning the situations on earth. They also carry out God's will, answering prayers, giving guidance, providing protection, fighting for the people of God, fending off the attacks of Satan. And at the top of the ladder stood God himself. Now just think about that. Jacob's at the bottom of the ladder. God's at the top of a stairway filled with angels in between. What does it mean? Well, let me answer that question this way, okay? There was a reason why Jacob was a cheater. He cheated because he thought God was far away from him. He has the same picture of God that a lot of people have of God today. A God in heaven who sort of just wound up the universe like a giant clock, set it running, and then busied himself with other things. To Jacob, God was too big, too vast, too magnificent, too almighty to ever be concerned about someone like him. And it wasn't that Jacob's view of God was too small, not at all. Jacob viewed God as entirely transcendent, so far removed from the earth that he had no time to worry about the details of human life. We all feel that way sometimes, don't we? Maybe God loves me. I know the Bible says he does. But it's a big world, and everybody's got problems, and he's got to take care of 7 billion people. How can God have time to worry about me? But that kind of thinking leads to a faulty conclusion. If God's not personal, if he's not concerned about your life, then you are left pretty much on your own. After all, you've got the rule book, you've got the 10 commandments, but after that, it's every man for himself. So sometimes you might have to bend the rules. Sometimes, you have to do things to help take care of yourself because you have to take care of it yourself. That's just the way life works. It sounds appealing and can even be made to sound spiritual. And I think that's the way Jacob had lived for many years. He cheated because he thought God either didn't notice or didn't care or was too busy to help him out. So Jacob constantly was taking matters into his own hands. And Jacob reasoned it probably this way. He says, if God were here, I wouldn't have to do things this way. But God's not here, so I have to take care of myself. But Jacob is wrong. And the message of his dream is this: Jacob, I'm nearer than you think I am. Although I'm in heaven and you're on earth, there's a stairway that reaches from me to you. And my angels are constantly watching over you. They tell me what you need, and I send them back with my answers. I'm not very far away. In fact, I'm with you wherever you go. When you travel, my stairway travels with you. I was with you in Beersheba. I was with you when you tricked Esau. I was with you when you deceived your father, and I'm with you tonight. And I will be with you in Haran. Everywhere you go, I will be with you. Now that in a nutshell is what this whole dream's about. It's a message about the nearness of God. In order to help Jacob understand it, God reaffirms the promise that he made to Abraham and Isaac. He says, I will give you this land in verse 13. In verse 13, he says, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. In verse 14, he says, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. In verse 14, he says, I will watch over you wherever you go. Verse 15, he says, I will bring you back into this land. Verse 15, he says, I will not leave you. Verse 15. If that seems unimportant, it is only because we aren't today where Jacob was that night. If you study these words very carefully, it becomes very clear that God is meeting Jacob at the very point of his personal need. Think about all the needs this would address. Think about it. Shame. I am the God of your father Abraham. Betrayal. I am the God of Isaac. Loss of his homeland. I will give you this land. Insignificance. All peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. Loss of his family. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. Fear of the future. I am with you wherever you go. And fear of failure. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. As the saying goes, that's as good as it gets. Jacob now receives the very same promise that God gave his grandfather and his father. And in addition, God promises to be with him while he is in Haran and to bring him back someday to the promised land. This is exactly what Jacob needed to hear on the eve of his journey to Haran. My son, I know who you are. I know what you've done. Nothing is hidden from me. I also know how frightened you are. Remember this. When you go to Haran, you won't be going alone. I'm going with you. And when your time in Haran is finished, I will bring you safely back home again. You have my sacred word on that. Think about it. At this point, Jacob feels guilty about his past. He's fearful for his future, and he's uncertain about the present. And to all of that, God simply tells him, he says, Jacob, I will be with you. It's a total solution to guilt, fear, and anxiety. Through all of this, Jacob is learning the lesson that there is no place he can go where God is not already there. Do you know what that truth is called? It's called the preeminent grace of God. That means that the grace of God goes before. You might define it this way, okay? In every situation of life, God is already there at work before I get there. He's working creatively, strategically, redemptively for my good and glory. Just think about it. So many times I limit my thinking to the fact that God is with me as I go through life. And that's true. He's with me as I go through life, but that's just part of the story. He's not only with me here and now, but he's already up ahead of me on the road in the future. Think about it this way. While I'm struggling with the problems of today, God is hard at work providing solutions for the things that I'm going to face tomorrow. He's already there. He's working creatively in situations I've yet to face, preparing them for me and me for them. Or to say it another way, while I'm living in Tuesday, he's clearing the road for me on Friday. That's Proverbs 3:6. That's what it says, what it means when it says that he shall make your paths straight. Or to say it yet another way, God is already at work providing solutions for problems I don't even know I have yet. It blows my mind. Are you worried about next week? Well, forget about it. He's already there. Are you worried about next year? Don't sweat it because he's already there. What about that crucial meeting you got next week? Well, you can sleep well because he's already there. What about that tough decision that looms ahead of you? You don't have to fear. God's already there. It would be enough if God simply just walked with you through the events of life, okay? But he does so much more than that. He goes ahead of you, clearing the way, arranging all the details of life so that when you get there, you can have confidence that God has already been there before you. That's the preeminent grace of God. He goes. The prevenient grace of God. He goes before his people. He's at work in the future while we're living in the present. That's what Jacob is discovering in this late night dream. Now suddenly Jacob awakens, okay? What time is it? Sometime after midnight, okay? He rubs his eyes, he stretches, he yawns, he sits up, and then he remembers. Was that a dream? Or was it reality? Or was it reality within a dream? And he thinks about it, and he ponders, and he wonders, and he begins to put the pieces together in his mind. When Jacob woke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid at that moment, and then he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. The phrase house of God, it's the Hebrew word Bethel. Bet for house, El for God, Bethel. All right? What was it that Jacob discovered? He discovered the omnipresence of God, that God is present all places, all the time. That's why he called the place where he slept Bethel, the house of God. And in years to come, Jacob's descendants would build a vast temple in Jerusalem that would be called the house of God. But no building of brick and mortar, no matter how expensive, can contain the presence of the Almighty. When we call our church building, okay, houses of God, we simply mean that they are dedicated to the worship of God, okay? Some people think that God is more present in this building than he is anywhere else. Well, that's not so. What God is teaching Jacob is that any place can be a house of God. as long as you're meeting God there, because he is meeting you there. You don't have to go to church to meet God. You should go to church because you love the Lord and you love his people. But you should be meeting God everywhere you go, right? You can meet him on the freeway. You meet him in a hospital room. You meet him at McDonald's, on a boat on the lake, on a plane soaring over the Atlantic, or in a rocking chair on a front porch, or riding a bus to school, sitting in a park bench, or riding in your car. God is everywhere. Wherever you are, there God is. And wherever God is, there's a stairway to heaven reaching down from God right where you are. You don't have to have a holy place. Any place can be a holy place if you just take time to stop and listen to God's voice speaking to you. Sometimes we have a deep spiritual experience and we say, I really felt the presence of God. And you know what? It's because he's there. He's there.